What's up, guys? Welcome to a new day. I'm Stephanie Ryder, and this is the 365 Shares podcast. It's January 23rd, 2024, and this is the 23rd episode of the 365 Shares podcast. Today's topic is exact nature. And the Big Red Book says when we look at the exact nature of our wrongs, we see that we have harmed ourselves based on our sense of being unacceptable, inferior, or lost. And this passage is talking about blaming ourselves for things, hiding our feelings, thinking we're the problem, interpreting the phrase, taking it to God, or what in Al-Anon we call let go and let God, to mean praying things away, but not actually healing ourselves. Thankfully, not being able to feel my feelings is not really one of my problems. I have a lot of feelings and I feel them all the time. And I love to share my feelings with people, which is part of why I'm doing this podcast, because I always want to be talking to someone about my feelings. And even if I'm not having a one-on-one conversation, I can record myself talking about my feelings. And maybe people listen to it, or at least I can listen to it and hear myself talk about my feelings, which for some reason seems to be really helping me 23 days into this podcast experiment. But there are a lot of people who have really stuffed their feelings. They weren't in a home where it was safe to have feelings, or if they did express their feelings, they were minimized or negated. And there are people whose personalities are just not as expressive in terms of inner feelings. There are people who are more fact-based. There are people who are less emotional. I'm really into astrology, so there are earth signs who are just like very black and white and don't tend to do a lot of deep introspective work. And they definitely have feelings. I don't want to say anyone with an earth sign doesn't have feelings, but compared to someone with like a water sign, for example, who's just like super all about feelings and like everything is fluid and emotional, there are people who are more unemotional. So I don't want to pathologize being less in tune with your feelings. There are a lot of reasons that this could be the case. Again, it could be family, it could be personality, it could be cultural, it could be male versus female. There's a stereotype that men are not as in touch with their feelings. And I think some of that is trained out of them, like boys don't cry, and just not giving men an outlet for their feelings other than like aggression and violence, and or just being the sort of like the rock, the good husband, someone who just like never shows fear or sadness. And that's a shame. I'm Steph, and this is my share. The affirmation today from the Strengthening My Recovery book is, on this day, I will sit with my feelings instead of pushing them away. Then I will make a phone call to share them with a fellow traveler. As I said, I have a lot of feelings. I feel anger easily. I feel sadness easily. I sometimes like to sit in sadness. There's just this sort of familiarity of grief that I have. I love listening to sad songs or occasionally watching a sad movie and just really being in this sort of melancholic mindset. I don't know why. Part of it, I think, is just familiarity. Like I spent a lot of time being really sad and depressed as a kid. Like I was really depressed as a young kid. And a lot of that was around my parents always fighting and neglected me. And then they were getting divorced and it was just a horrible divorce. And then my dad moved out and nobody really seemed to care how I felt about it. My parents really only just cared about winning and getting the kids and, for my mom getting the most child support and for my dad paying the least amount of child support. And I remember just spending a lot of time when I wasn't with my friends and when I wasn't at school, I just spent a lot of time alone reading. And I remember reading Interview with the Vampire when I was probably 11, which is a little bit young probably for that book, but I always read a lot of books. I was always reading. I would read things that were above my reading level. I just remember identifying so strongly with the character Claudia, who's a little girl who they turn into a vampire. And I think in the book, she's like 6 or 7, really young. And she grows up mentally and emotionally, but her body stays the same size and age. So she gets to this developmental stage where she's interested in men. And so she's like killing these prostitutes and bringing them back home just to sort of have like the bodies of adult women around because she desperately wants the body of an adult woman. And because she was dying and she was turned so young, she just was never able to grow and mature that way. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie, if you haven't read the book, I highly recommend it. Definitely jump forward 30 seconds in this podcast she does die. And when she died in the book, I remember just crying hysterically. And we had this woman who was sort of a housekeeper, sort of a nanny, and English was her second language, and she mostly spoke Spanish. And I was trying to explain to her like why I was crying so hard and like pointing at the book, and she just really didn't get it, why I was just so desperately upset about this outcome because it become so emotionally tied to this character. It just sort of compounded my feeling of aloneness. And it's not that nobody noticed what I was interested in. My mom did take me to see the movie when it came out, the Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise movie with Kirsten Dunst as Claudia, and she did a great job. But just in terms of my inner world, there was nobody who really understood me. And my friends were great, and I felt like I could talk to them about anything. But again, we were young. And so you don't have the in depth dialogue always with your friends. We talked about movies. We rode our bikes to the video store because there were all these little mom and pop video stores where you could rent movies. We would go to 7-Eleven and get drinks and like just do whatever we wanted. We were basically just feral kids. But yeah, I think I just still spend a lot of time in my head, and I still spend a lot of time in my inner world. And there are things that are just part of my life that I never share with anyone. And I almost am living like multiple lives because I have my work life, and I have my social life, and I have my interaction with my partner. And I do feel like I can tell him anything. But I also just have all of these thoughts and all these feelings, and especially these songs. I listen to music all the time. I'm creating this podcast on Spotify for podcasters. I listen to Spotify, and I have all these playlists for if I want to be pumped up, if I want to feel optimistic, if I'm just feeling sad. I have one that kind of helps me be hopeful for eventually having a child someday, hopefully, because I've been on this long fertility journey. Podcasts that remind me of different partners. And at one point a few months ago, my Spotify got hacked, and someone got into it and changed my password and locked me out. And I had this serious panic at my apartment pool, like outside in the pool, on my phone, on the chat function with Spotify, trying to get them to reset my password, which they did. It all got resolved. But I was literally like melting down because part of my mental health journey has just been to create all these playlists with all these songs that help put me in the mindset that I want to be in. So if I'm like really bummed and I need to feel hopeful, I have all these songs that remind me that like, hey, this is all part of the journey, and the positive outcome you want is just around the corner. And I literally was thinking like, how on earth can I possibly control my mental health without my podcast? And I was just terrified, not that I would never get back into my account, but that whoever got into it, I was terrified that they would like erase all my playlists, or that they would like a bunch of different songs and change the algorithm so that now I was getting a bunch of random nonsense. And it looked like it was someone in another country. So I was just like, what am I going to do? And I was seriously like joking, not joking, being like crisis averted, like suicide averted, because I just don't know how I would survive without my music. So that's a huge Spotify plug. I've been on Spotify for years and I love it. But it all kind of just plays to that internal world of feelings. And maybe I could get them out more. I do have one very, very, very good girlfriend, a childhood girlfriend who I can tell anything to. And, she understands and she has the same kind of inner world. I'm going to try to be more vulnerable in this podcast as we progress. I mean, obviously, I'm not just going to come right out and be like, I'm this crazy psychopath, listen to me for mental health advice. But I do want to share things on here that maybe I don't always share with humans in my day-to-day life. So I'm just going to keep thinking about ways to do that because I have the feelings. I know how to deal with the feelings on my own, but I don't always express the thoughts and feelings to other people. And today, and a lot of days, I struggle with rumination and these sort of obsessive thoughts where I'll fixate on a person or an outcome, and I'll just think about it and think about it and think about it and think about it. And I'll like live in this fantasy world where if I'm missing someone, that I'm with that person and I have this whole imaginary conversation in my head. Or if I want something to happen, I just try to imagine that, what it would be like when that thing happens. There's the quote unquote real world, and then there's my inner world. And I will try as we go along to get more comfortable sharing that with you guys.